Hey, Baker leaders, Dr. Gary and Dr. Vito here with a special show on the Myers-Briggs personality styles, personality types. And hey, Dr. Vito, you ready to get rolling here with Myers-Briggs?
Ready to go. Good morning, everyone. Although I think it's still morning. We were supposed to start in the morning, but of course, as usual, Gary was about 5, 10, 15 minutes late. And
Well, which was it? 5, 10, or 15? You're a J.
so I don't know. Well, I log on 5 minutes early as usual
Oh,
for me. So I could have been waiting here like
I
15
was
minutes.
busy.
Well, no, it's it's expected. You know why it's expected?
Why?
Because you're a P and
Oh.
I'm a J.
Yeah, that almost sounds like a dirty word when you put it that way, that I'm a P. But interestingly enough, as we get into this, we're going to find out that as a mechanical engineer and all the things that I did in business, I was a J my whole life. And about 5 years ago, I flipped to a P. So we can change when we're kind of in the middle of these things, and we're going to learn a lot about that today, aren't we? Aren't we, Vito?
Yes, we are. And hope to have some fun with it as well.
Well, from the bottom of my heart, as also an F, I'm sorry for being late.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
So
as a TJ, I don't care. We don't suffer fools easily. We'll get into that. We'll talk about that as well. That's why all those
um,
TJs are in management. You know, those four corners, you see the TJs, they're all in management.
oh.
We'll talk about that.
Well, let's get started by understanding what personality style isn't, in terms of some of the things to share with people. We're just going to be doing some just education today on Myers-Briggs as a precursor to our January meeting. So let's talk about what the purpose of understanding personality styles are and what it isn't.
Well, let's start with isn't. First of all, it isn't. It is not a test. Any instrument you take, there are no right or wrong answers. It's self-reported data, and it's non-judgmental, as you just stated. There's no good personality or bad personality, at least not the instruments we use. That would be a whole separate field of psychology that uses specific instruments designed for abnormal behavior. But this is general personality types of the general population, and not one type is any better or worse than the other.
Yeah, which comes to our point where when we're talking about leadership, what we found in these 16 types, and we'll go into understand what we mean by 16 types, is studies have shown that although some types are better suited for leaders than others, there are leaders in all 16 types. So there's strengths and limitations in each. And I don't want anybody to think that if they're one type or another, that means they can't be an effective leader, because that's just not the case.
Exactly. And we'll talk about how that happens and why certain types are identified with certain professions. Well, we're going to talk. We'll talk about natural tendencies, then people understand what that means. Larry started with an exercise where we signed our names with our natural hand, and then he asked us to sign our name with our other hands. And Larry said, "Well, how did it feel? You know, when we sign our name with our natural hand, we don't even think about it. No need to. It just comes to us naturally." And that's what we mean by natural tendency. But if I broke my right arm, which I did one time, and I had to write everything left-handed, you can learn how to do that. You can learn new behaviors. And that's what the whole concept of natural tendencies is. It's a very simple way to think about personality types. What are your natural tendencies in terms of everything you do? Your natural tendencies for using your five senses, how you perceive the world. How do you take in information? What are your natural tendencies for how you use that information? How does it affect your emotions? How do you analyze the information? What decisions how do you go about making decisions? And then what we see most of all is what are your all that results in your natural tendencies to exhibit certain behaviors. And the whole idea of development, especially increasing your emotional intelligence, is have a greater understanding of your natural tendencies. Take that to the next step. In what situations are those tendencies, natural tendencies, are those natural behaviors? In which situations are they very effective?
So wait, you're saying that my personality style, and I heard some of these words that are my personality style is going to affect the way I see the world. It's going to affect the way I make decisions. It's going to affect the way I interact with others. All of these things wrapped up into my personality.
Your personality is a collection of all those natural tendencies.
Hmm. And if I'm one way, but the environment asks me to be another way, then I'm what the environment is. And sometimes we see this at work, right? Let's say I will share with everybody that 97% of everybody at Baker Roofing Company are J's, which is a good thing. It's a construction company. We'll learn more about the J and the scheduling and all that, what's necessary. But if I'm a P and I'm asked to be a J, then I need to be on time and, not be 10 minutes late for a meeting like I was with you. And that's the way it is all the time. It's going to be, I can get better at that, but it's going to be like signing my signature with my left hand. I'll never be as good as my tendency or my natural tendency to just be spontaneous.
Well, you could be as good. You never know. Depends on your training, the effort you put forth, but it will take more effort than your natural tendency.
Yeah, and the more effort means energy, and energy, we learned a little bit from that, but from Larry again, it is going to take. It can create a certain amount of stress and trying to do things a way that's different than what my natural tendency is.
And you've just really described what leadership, a simple definition of leadership and development. We recognize our natural tendencies. We recognize in which situations those tendencies are not as effective as they need to be. And then we learn new behaviors to be more effective in those situations.
Yeah, so let's dive into this and really understand some of the differences and start with the introvert and the extrovert.
Okay.
Because I'm the extrovert.
Exactly.
And I'm going to talk when I'm just kind of bring it up, whatever pops into my head. I talk, then I think. And somebody like you thinks, does he ever shut up? Did I interrupt you enough yet?
I think we made our point. And this is an example of where we go through life talking about, I have a personality conflict with this person because we don't understand our own natural tendencies and we don't understand the other person's natural tendencies. And what Gary and I just demonstrated, Gary being an extroverts, yeah, they're outgoing, but what the difference between extrovert, introvert really means is, where do we get our energy? An extrovert like Gary gets his energy with interacting with people. It energizes him. He enjoys the conversation, is very engaged, has many relationships with many people, very enthusiastic and passionate in his conversations. Where an introvert such as myself, I get my energy more inwardly, introspectively. I like to think about things and analyze them. And before I say anything, I give thought to what I'm going to say. Where the extrovert is more do, think, do, or talk, think, talk. The introvert's going to think, then they're going to talk, and then they're going to think. And the challenge there is, as Gary just demonstrated, extroverts don't like pregnant pauses. They don't like silence. They're going to fill in the gap. And if an introvert such as myself doesn't respond fast enough, the extrovert's going to cut them off. The extrovert's going to finish their sentence for them. And you do that enough, we will start to make judgments about each other.
And with somebody like Vito talking to me, you're sitting there going, does this guy ever think about what he's going to say before he opens his mouth? Because that's an introvert's thought, is I'm going to think about it. I don't want to make a mistake with it. So there's this judgment that goes along with it. Because for me, with the energy, I'm like, Vito, talk to me. Come on, say something to me. Come on, speak up. Will you just come on, go ahead and just blurt it out. Just let it go. And Vito's like, when you shut up and give me 5 seconds, maybe I will speak up.
And I think people can now see how that could end up being a quote unquote personality conflict. Because as I said, we're going to make judgments about that. Geez, Gary keeps cutting me off. He's rude. Vito won't say anything. Was he stupid? What's wrong with this guy? It's really about where you get your energy. And the behaviors Gary and I demonstrated is how where we get our energy it results in the behaviors.
So Dr. Vito, let me jump in here for a second and let's take a look at this chart and review a few of the interesting numbers that we have on extroverts and introverts. And these are organized by cohort. And you can see under the extroverts, Dave Pippinger is a 94, and that's on 100. Remember, this scale goes from 0 to 100 on the extrovert and then 0 to 100 on introvert. So if we put Shannon and Christy and Dave together in a cohort, the three of those would spend time listening to Dave talk. Although I have to say that normally with someone with such a high extrovert number like Dave's, has typically come into our boot camps and required a timeout from Dr. Gary. In this case, he is not, because he's more aware that he's a high extrovert and tries to spend time listening and keeping his mouth shut. If you don't realize that, you will become aware very quickly that you're doing a lot of the talking. And I want to throw that shout out to Jason, who's a 53, not extremely high, but high enough to where if you're in a conversation with Christy or Shannon, you're going to be doing a lot of the talking, and be aware that you might want to ask some questions and listen to them once in a while. We're going to spend time looking at all of these numbers, the N, the S, the T, the F, the J, and the P. And you'll notice in the last two columns under the J and the P, I just want to point out there are no Ps, they're all Js. However, Pavo at the very bottom right-hand corner is a 1J, which means that he could be a J or a P, which means that he can be very flexible and spontaneous, but at the same time, he likes to have things scheduled. So it's very situational for him. And also for the people that are in the single digits, David, Ian, and Eben are all single digit Js. And it's interesting because Baker Roofing and most of the construction companies we work with have about 95% of the people tested in the Myers-Briggs are Js, which makes sense. You want a sense of schedule and control.
Think about having one of those days at work where you do nothing but go to meetings. Your calendar's full, one meeting to the next. And I've had days like that, a lot of them in my career. And believe it or not, in those meetings, I could act just like the way Gary acted, because I had to. People looked to me for a leadership role. So I had to engage. I had to talk a lot. I had to be enthusiastic. The difference is, for me, it was harder. It took more energy. So when I went home at night, I was exhausted. But if Gary had a day like that,
Oh, I'll tell you what I would do. I'd say to the whole group, hey, let's go have a beer.
me, I need a nap. I'm a tired old man. I want to go take a
In
nap.
fact,
Like that.
some of the work that I've done with Vito, and I know that you have too, when I've done coaching with high introverts, and I say, you need to find a period between the time you're finished work and the time you get home to have at least a 15 or a 20-minute quiet break, especially if you walk in the door and you've got kids, so that you can have that few minutes of quiet time to kind of clear your head, so that when you walk in the door, you're not saying, get away from me.
And people tend to think that because extroverts tend to talk a lot, sales is a good profession for them. And that's true. But that doesn't mean that introverts can't be successful salespeople. Some of the most successful salespeople I know are introverts. They develop deep relationships, one-on-one, and they come across as being very sincere. The challenge with extroverts, if they over-rely, remember Larry talked about over-relying on a strength or over-relying on a natural tendency, like being able to speak very, very easily, you can come across as being insincere.
And you come across as being self-centered because you're starting to talk about yourself, or you talk whatever is popping in your head, you're talking about it. And the most important skill of sales is questioning. Just like coaching, it's questioning. And an introvert does a much better job on that naturally, to focus on the other person and ask those questions, where an extrovert tends to get wrapped up in the moment and start talking about things that sometimes don't make sense for a sales call.
And of course, the introvert would be typically the better listener.
Yep, absolutely. So those are some examples of introverts, extroverts. And remember, it's not just about expressiveness, because as Dr. Vito mentioned, you can be very expressive as an introvert in filling a role in leadership, or if you're with one or two people that you're comfortable with, you will often speak very openly with them, and you can look like what you would label as an extrovert. But an introvert, being very comfortable with one or two people, will speak their mind very openly. So don't confuse introversion, extroversion just with expressiveness. That's just a symptom. The true underlying delineator between introvert and extrovert is where you get your energy, from people or from the inside. Let's talk about the next one.
Okay, the S and the N, sensing or intuition. If two people, an S and an N, were to look at a picture, the S would be very focused and look at all the details. They will tell you every minute detail that's in the picture. Compared to the N, who's not going to focus like that. They're going to look at the whole picture, quote unquote, the big picture.
Oh, big picture, man. Let me tell you about the big picture. I'm going to jump in here because I got to tell you about my brother. Okay. My brother, Rick, is an extremely high S. He was a nuclear power submarine enlisted man in the Navy. He then went to nuclear power plant for over 30 years and retired from a nuclear power. This is a good thing. Focus on detail when you're running a nuclear power plant. Me, I'm like off the chart end. I'm 100 on the end. So we're at completely opposite spectrums. And I often use this kind of a metaphor, description for people. I'm standing on top of the mountain. I'm looking at the forest and I'm describing to my brother the greenery and the sky and the clouds. And he's down in the forest looking at the side of a tree and describing to me an ant walking up the bark. And we're basically in the same area of the world, seeing it entirely differently. And we have always struggled with our ability to communicate because we're so extremes with the S and the N.
That's a great example because I'm sure Rick is he's describing the ant standing next to the brown leaf on the floor of the forest. And you're going, what are you talking about? Rick is thinking, what do you mean you don't see that? It's obvious. And as you're
talking about the green forest, and he's like, what green forest? What are you talking about? The mountain, the clouds. So let's take another quick look at the chart and see that the higher ends in this group are Isaac and Owen. Not really high, it's fairly moderate. And Ian is the highest S. So if we put them in a group, their conversation would sound a little bit like my brother Rick's and mine, where I'm focused on the big picture and he's focused on the details. But understand that we are extremes. By we, I'm talking about my brother Rick and I. These scores are not that extreme and the challenges of the personalities wouldn't be as great. But just be aware that intuitives want to see and understand the big picture. They want to get to the bottom line more quickly. And the S's, the sensors, want to hear the information and the details before they get to the bottom line. So that's part of this personality profile.
The S will look at the detail and go step by step in logical order, which is very good. You got somebody running a nuclear plant. Yeah, you don't want them saying, "Oh, let's try this over here." You want that person very logical, step by step. Where the N is going to be more theoretical. They're going to see the picture. Instead of seeing the details of what they're looking at, they're seeing the complete picture, and from that picture, they're going to make up a story. What that picture is telling them. They're going to see the connections. They're going to see the possibilities. Where the S is too down in the details to see anything greater than what they're already looking at.
Yeah.
Another example would be the S. If the way we learn, there's different types of learning styles. The S is going to most likely learn with a manual. You give an S a manual, they're going to love it. They will go through that manual, page 1 to page 2 to page 3, They will follow it in logical, sequential order. And they'll continue to refer back to that manual. The N's will use the manual once. Then they'll throw it out and they'll write a new manual. Because they see they know a better way to describe how to do this job, how to do this task, because they see the bigger picture. Well, you can make shortcuts here, we can improve it over here. Again, they see the possibilities and they're striving to make improvements. They're the originators, the innovators. N's tend to be more innovative than the S's, who are more logical and practical. The N's more theoretical. You're going to see S's in law enforcement, where you're going to see N's in law theory, writing the laws, how they apply constitutional law. You're going to see S's in accounting. You're going to see N's in macroeconomics.
At least that's what we hope. Because if we have a high end in accounting, their accounting system might not be exactly accurate for what's needed.
May not comply with GAAP, yeah, or FASB.
Right. The other example I've often used is why they write a business plan the way they write it. So think about this. Business plans are always written with an executive summary, and then it goes into all the detail, and in the back there's all these charts and finance and so on. And what you'll typically see is a high S will start in the back and look at the details of the P&Ls, the pro formas, the marketing plans, and they'll work their way forward until they can get to the summary, and then it all makes sense. Where an N has to read the summary first for all of that detail to make any sense at all. So they start with the very first page, will read that summary, and then start flipping around. And often will jump from one thing to another and looking for things that are of interest to them. They're not necessarily going to follow a structured path. They're just kind of being creative with trying to understand the big picture.
And in the end, with the end, they'll delegate the details.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Look at the big picture, understand who's best at doing what. No, I'm not going to worry about these details. I'll mess it up if I do anyway. So let somebody else do that.
Exactly. In fact, I used to always have a high S on my staff that when I was making a decision, and we'll talk about how we make decisions here in a minute with the T and the F, but the foundation of that decision, they were always there to ask me one question. Hey, Gary, what's that based on? And I would go, I'm sure I read something somewhere that gave me the information that I need to make this decision. And they would say, well, maybe we should look into the data. Okay. So I would back up and we would look into the data, and that helped me make better decisions. Speaking of which,
decision making, yeah.
Decision making has to do with the T, the thinker, and the F, the feeler, which is more about values than it is about emotion. So talk to me a little bit about this. And let me see, I got to look at my list. How many Fs do we have? So out of our group of 12, we have 5 Fs. Of course, 4 of those 5 are 6s on the scale, as you can see. Brian, Owen, Roman, and Chris, which really puts them borderline FT. But the real heart in our group, that would be Lisa. She's got a 28, and the rest of us tend to lead towards the T, the analytical side, with nobody really super high on that. But Jason is a 28. So again, he is a little bit of the outlier with that 28 on the T. But again, we're talking about 100 scales. So it's pretty balanced here between the T and an F overall in this group as to where we stand comparing our values-driven decisions versus our analytical-driven decisions. Talk to me about the difference between a T and an F, Vito.
Well, a T is going to be, the simplest way to put it, they're going to be much more analytical and non-personal, objective in their decision making, where the F is going to personalize it. They make personal decisions, the impact on the person. The T is almost having, when they make a decision, it's almost an out-of-body experience. It's as if they were an observer looking at the situation. They're on the outside looking in, and they're analyzing what's going on. And they also probably have, in terms of their values, they have in their mind a list of criteria that they use to make judgments about what they see, to make the decision. Where the F is going to be much more empathetic with the person in the situation. The F is going to make that decision as if it's them in that situation. Well, I guess one comparison would be, let's say somebody stole a loaf of bread because they were hungry and their kids were hungry. The T, making a non-personal decision, is going to go, well, so what? He was hungry. It has nothing to do with it.
They broke the law.
Yeah, the law is you can't steal, regardless of the reason. That bread belonged to the store owner and you can't just take it. The F is going to be much more empathetic. I can't blame him for stealing. His kids were hungry.
So the T is kind of the head, right?
Yeah.
And the F is the heart.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And so how did this engineer being schizophrenic go from the head to the heart as I've gotten older? And I've never been a high T or high F, but it's moved about 30 or 40 points as I've gotten older, and I've made that big shift. Is there something that in your experience that you've known where people make these kinds of shifts?
Well, I think just life's experiences. None of us are so inflexible that we tend to, our natural tendencies does not mean that's all we do. In fact, I think the Myers-Briggs terminology, there are 16 types. View it as 16 rooms in a house, and your type is the room in which you're most comfortable. But that doesn't mean you never visit all the other rooms. The F in, if you're a T, you've got some F in you. I can tell you my personal experience, being a parent changes that.
I've shared with everybody from Baker some of my story, and 10 years ago is actually when I went from a T to an F, is when I went through that life experience and made me understand more and be more compassionate and empathetic more with people that go through life struggles. And sometimes your personality can shift, and in terms of how we see ourselves and what we want to be when we show up.
I mean, being in human resources most of my career, obviously, when I was in a business, it was very cyclical. So you go through the stages. Well, we have to lay people off. I've been downsized, right sized, whatever they call it. You go through a couple of those experiences, you become much more empathetic when it's again your turn to make decisions about who gets to keep their job, what happens to them, how they're treated. If you do have to lay people off, how they're treated. As I got older in life and more experience, I did a much better, more empathetic job of doing that.
We started off with the judging and the perceiving, the J and the P, and being I'm a P and you're a J. In fact, as you've done this over the years with me, I love the story. You got to share the story of packing to go to the airport, because that's the one that really puts everything into perspective to me.
As Gary may have alluded, I'm a J, and my wife is a P. The J's tend to be very methodical, and the J's look at the world. And this is why a lot of people in management executives are J's, because what you learn as you go through life and what they teach you in school, business school, is you look at the business environment, you look at the world around you, and you have to analyze it. And the way you analyze it, you put things into categories in order to process the information more easily, and you make plans. And you plan, as Peter Drucker once said, plan your work, work your plan. So you come up with a plan and you march it forward step by step, and you hit the deadline. In fact, you hit the deadline 2 weeks before the deadline, because the idea of missing a deadline is so odious to you. You just can't stand being accused of missing or told you've missed the deadline. But P, on the other hand, much more adaptable, much more flexible, enjoy the experience, enjoy the process. And they'll also, doesn't mean they always miss the deadline. In fact, they'll hit the deadline. You give a P a deadline, they'll hit it. They may not go about it the way you want them to, but they'll get there. And the example Gary alludes to, when my wife and I packed to go out of town, I'm packed the night before. The morning we're going to leave to drive to the airport, my wife is standing in front of the dryer throwing clothes into the suitcase. Now, this used to drive me nuts. So we're going to be late. I'd be down at the garage. We're going to be late. We're going to be late, and that pace. And I finally learned to live with it. So I would just go like for a 5-mile walk and come back, and she'd be ready to go. And we get to the airport. We've never missed a flight. We just go about packing in 2 different ways. And unpacking the same. What happens when we get home? What do you think? Of course, I'm unpacked in 2 minutes. Boom, into the dirty laundry, this, that, put that away, this away, suitcase away. And I'll trip over my wife's suitcase for 2 weeks.
Once again, taking a look at our results, we can look all the way to the right and we can see that everybody is a J. That sense of scheduling, and it makes a lot of sense in a construction company. At the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that Pavo is a 1, so he's very borderline on the JP. But so is Eben and Ian, and let's see, Dave. Dave is also a 6. They're all single digits, which means that you can balance this idea of being very scheduled with being spontaneous in your lifestyle. So it becomes very situational in how you go about getting things done as a J or a P. If I get 20 people, 19 of them are going to be J's, because it's a construction company. We need to have a sense of schedule, a sense of order. And in fact, if we look at the types of jobs that people have, a project manager, you want a project manager that's a J. You want them to be a T and a J, right? Right, Vito?
Most likely. I mean, stay on project, stay on budget, stay on time, meet the specs. That's where the money is. However, thank God for the P's. Adaptability is good. As I heard one project manager, a woman who was responsible for new weapon systems for the Navy, just happened to watch a documentary on it, and something went wrong during the test. I'll never forget this. I loved what she said. She said, "A plan is nothing more than a good start." And thank God for those Ps who are adaptable, because when the plan goes wrong, now what do you do? Greater adaptability. And I think that talks to the whole idea of the importance of diversity of thought and diversity of personality in groups. Avoid that groupthink. If you've got, if it's just a bunch of TJs doing the project plan, who is thinking of the what if? Who's in the room to remind everyone that we're not talking about a spreadsheet here. We're talking about people and people's lives and their families. My
And
advice,
here's a spoiler alert for people at Baker, and I alluded to talking about this.
no,
Just realize that when push comes to shove, tough decisions are going to be made. Prentice, Mark, and John Matthews are all Fs. They all have heart. They all think from that. They've been in business long enough to know that they've got to analyze, and they balance all of that. But one of the reasons that the Baker culture is the way it is, one of the reasons they're looking for people that will work hard and get along and really believe in always good work and try to find a position for you if you're aligned with those values is because of those people at the top of this organization that have heart. When we get together on our mini camp is to break off into groups, do some exercise, and understand more and more about this as we go down the path. What are your final thoughts, Dr. Vito?
well, the last thing I like to say to people is like all personality assessments, again, it's not a test, no right or wrong answers, but take it for what it's worth. Read the report, take in the information. And if you don't agree with it 100%, well, that's absolutely normal. No one ever really does. Assessing personality isn't like measuring a desk with a ruler. Use it to help you learn about yourself, increase your self awareness, and use it to increase your awareness about other people.
Thank you, Dr. Vito. And finally, Baker leaders, a couple of things I'd like you to prepare for in our coming mini camp. First of all, make sure that your Zoom software is up to date. Log on and make sure that you don't get that message when you're scrambling to get on. You need to update and install new software. Do that ahead of time. Be in a quiet place. Make sure that you're somewhere where you're not going to be interrupted, as if we're all in a training room together. Treat this like it was the boot camp, where you're not going to be interrupted for the 2.5 hours we're together. I look forward to seeing everybody. Share with me what you've learned from this video, one thing that you've learned, so that we can really take these baby steps to wax on, wax off, and trust the process. It's just one more step in your development to become a great leader. If you have any questions, contact your coach or me, and we will certainly be there for you. IGYB. Anything we can do to continue to help you through this process of developing your leadership greatness. I'm Dr. Gary and Dr. Vito, making good bosses into great leaders with compassionate accountability. Take care and be well.